Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Clear Values podcast. Today, it is my pleasure to be speaking with Curtis Morley. Curtis is a keynote speaker, an emotionologist, a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, six-times entrepreneur, the founder of Counterfeit Emotions, master of psychology candidate, and he helps people and companies find true authenticity. The new principles found in his forthcoming book, Counterfeit Emotions, are creating mindset shifts and behavior changes in individuals and organizations around the world. He shares this life-changing message of inspiration, hope, peace, and joy so people can live their most authentic lives and find levels of success they never thought possible. Curtis, welcome to the Real Clear Values podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tom. I'm super excited about our conversation.
So, one of the things that I think people are going to be wondering about from the get-go is what does it mean counterfeit emotions? What are counterfeit emotions? Surely you feel what you feel, don't you? And they're as real as they can be.
Yeah, it is a very new concept, the idea of counterfeit emotions. And the definition of a counterfeit emotion is that every emotion that serves us, every emotion that takes us where we want to go, has a counterfeit, except for one. There's only one emotion that can't be counterfeited. But every other emotion has counterfeits that look and act and feel like the original emotion, but they create these destructive cycles of disconnection in our lives. And it's so fascinating because our entire lives we're taught opposite emotions. And it's really easy to understand an opposite emotion. For example, love and hate. Love says hug, hate says hit. And it's so far on the other end of the spectrum that it's easy to recognize. And you look back in history, you've got the seven cardinal sins of Christianity, you've got the five kleshas of Buddhism, and they all talk about these opposite emotions. The reason why counterfeit emotions are so important to understand is because they're not the opposite action, the opposite feeling. They feel just like the original emotion. If we go back to the example of love and hate, it's hug and hit, right? But there's an emotion that's kiss and kiss. Love says kiss, lust also says kiss. And so the reason why these are so important to understand is because they're sneaky. They get us to pretend like we're living virtuously when we're actually living in the counterfeit and we're not tapping into our true self. We're not tapping into the core of who we are.
That's really interesting. And it almost sounds like these counterfeits are temptations of sorts. So where do they come from then? If something's a counterfeit, it presupposes that a counterfeit has been created by someone or something to kind of deceive somebody or trick them for their gain. So where do these counterfeits come from? Is this coming externally? Is this coming internally? Is this um, a biological thing? Are they biological impulses? What's going on there?
Yeah, yeah, this is a great question. So the and actually, if I could address something you said earlier that kind of goes along with this is is that when I first share this concept with people, a lot of people think, oh, authentic emotions are good, counterfeit emotions are bad. And I want to just right out of the gate state there's no such thing as a bad emotion. Kind of like you were saying, emotions, we feel them and we have to feel them. And, there is no such thing as a bad emotion. Even the counterfeits, they bring a message. And if we try and block or suppress or any of these things in our souls, then we're actually not receiving the gift that these emotions are trying to bring us. The distinction is the authentic emotions are the emotions we want to live in. The counterfeit emotions are simply bringing a message, and we need to gladly accept the message, say thank you, and point that emotion over to the authentic. So a really good example of that is anger. Anger. So, and I guess let's step back one step. With the framework of counterfeit emotions, there's 42 different dyads or pairs of emotions. So, love and lust, guilt and shame, easy one to understand. We can dig into that one because I think that really relates to our conversation today. Um, kind and nice. It turns out nice is the counterfeit of kind. And yet we're all taught, Santa has his naughty and nice list. And we, from birth, we're taught, be nice, be nice, be nice. But the funny thing is, the word nice actually comes from the Latin word necius, which means ignorant. And so when you think about being nice, it actually means be ignorant. Don't have an opinion, be a placater, be a doormat, be someone that just, is gonna make sure they don't rock the boat. But going back to this idea of anger versus advocacy, anger is the counterfeit of advocacy. And the reason I want to bring this up is because of that concept of receiving the message and then turning it to the authentic. So the counterfeit actually brings a message with it. And can we do a fun little experiment? Would that be okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we'll do a pop quiz here, and it's okay if you don't know the answer because in the thousands and thousands of people I've asked this to, I've only had two people know the answer, and so it's okay if you don't know the answer. So the question is, who is Bobby Seale and Huey Newton.
I'm struggling. I'd really be guessing if I was trying to answer that question.
Yeah, which is everyone. Everyone is that same thing. Okay, let me ask you a different question. Who is Martin Luther King Jr.?
Well, he's MLK, isn't he? It's almost like he's a thing in himself, the one of the great originators of the civil rights movement.
Exactly. That's exactly it. So the question is, why don't you know who Bobby Seale and Huey Newton are? Why doesn't anyone know who those two men are? And the reason why is because Bobby Seale and Huey Newton, they were the founders of the Black Panthers, the black militant group that fought against racism, that firebombed cars and killed police officers and ruined buildings and businesses. And like they saw an injustice. That was the message. They saw an injustice, a true injustice, the injustice of racism. And they said, we're going to go to anger. We're going to take that injustice and we're taking it to anger. We're going to do it in violence and destruction. But Martin Luther King Jr., we're on different continents having this conversation, and you know just as well as I know that Martin Luther King Jr. changed the world. He ended racism in a very real, substantial way. And and his path, instead of going to anger, his path was going to advocacy. He didn't say, I'm just going to stand around and let everybody be racist. He says, no, I won't stand for this. But what I will stand for is I will stand with 1 million people at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial and decry this injustice. But I'm going to do it in a way that invites in versus a way that tears down and projects out. I'm going to invite in. And so you can see how anger destroys, advocacy builds up. Anger excludes and shuns, advocacy invites in. But they both address injustice. They both start at the core. And when we're feeling angry, when we're feeling that emotion inside, the important thing to do is to say, oh, anger, what are you doing right now? You're bringing me this message that there's an injustice. I'm going to take that message, I'm going to go right over here, and I'm going to go to advocacy to address the injustice. I'm not going to go to passivity. I'm not going to, just sit around and say, oh, it's okay if there's an injustice happening. No, I'm going to address it, but I'm going to do it on the side of advocacy, not
Hmm.
on.
That's really interesting. And actually, Of course, I would say this, but when you mentioned that the two chaps that you mentioned previously associated with the Black Panthers, I have heard those names in that context before. Now that you mention it, but out of context, I'd absolutely no chance of getting that. But it's a really interesting example that you use there. I've got to say as well at this stage, Curtis, what this is reminding me of is a concept from Jungian psychology, which is very
Mm,
popular, of the shadow and the
mm,
shadow self being the parts of ourselves that are kind of underneath the surface that we try to hide, but that are acting upon us, so to speak, in the sense that they kind of come out, it kind of comes out in different ways. And I think anger is definitely one of those things. When we feel anger, it is a message. You know, Jung very much in his work was talking about integrating the shadow into the whole. So we have, of course, you know, in his terms, in his paradigm, we have, of course, the persona, which is what we present to the world, and then the shadow, which is the maybe the uglier side of us, maybe the things that are the unrefined edges of our characters, which kind of suppressed and pushed down. And Jung was very much about integrating the two. So what you're saying here sounds similar to that, whereas you'll feel angry about something, and that might be the shadow, if you like. You know, I feel triggered or I feel angry about this thing. But what you're saying is that it asks a question, doesn't it? It begs the question as to why am I angry, and then what am I going to do with that anger in being an advocate to resolve an unjust situation. Or yeah, I'd say generally it's going to be some sort of injustice, isn't it? If it's anger, is
yeah.
is that about right? Is that a decent summary?
Yeah, I love the comparison with the Jungian psychology and there yeah, there's only two reasons we ever get angry. That's it. There's only two. The first one is danger. If the bear is chasing you in the woods, then anger is a really important emotion because it's going to fill your body with adrenaline. It's going to get you to pick up the stick and poke the bear in the eye, right? And that's important. That's a really important thing to do. And at the same time, the second one is a perceived injustice. And notice I use the word perceived. I use that very intentionally because as a child, if my glass of milk is that much lower than my brother's glass of milk, that's a perceived injustice, right? That's like, oh, it's not fair. This is the world's ending. And my glass of milk has like just a couple inches shorter milk, whatever. That's a perceived injustice. In the case of racism, that's a true injustice. And and like you said, if we try to take anger and stuff it down and be like, no, no, I'm going to be a quote unquote good boy, not get angry, but not address the issue, then what happens is that that lives inside of us. That anger doesn't go away. That anger actually builds and it turns into resentment and it turns into all these other things. But when we take the injustice and we say, hey, anger, thank you for bringing the message. Your job is done. I'm going to address this, but I'm going to do it in a healthy way called advocacy. Then anger tips its hat and says, thanks so much. I'm done. My job here, we're good. All right, I'm going to go now. And anger is able to leave, it's able to release from us because it knows it's going to be addressed. It knows that, hey, this guy's got it and he's going to take it over here to advocacy. And you know what? That actually works a lot better because it doesn't create more problems. And so understanding that when the counterfeit comes in, we take the message and we say, thank you so much. Thank you, anger. I appreciate what you're doing for me because you've given me motivation. You've given me all these things in the form of this message. I'm going to take that and put it right over here in advocacy. You can be done, and we can all of us be happy. The anger, the advocacy, me, my soul, we can all be happy together. And anger says, thank you so much, tips the hat,
Hmm.
and moves on.
Yeah, yeah. I like how you speak of anger there as if it's anger's a person that needs to be whose message needs to be received and whose message needs to be taken on board, it needs to be validated, it then needs to be acted upon in an appropriate way, and then it's good to go. Then it's like, right, okay, I've done my job. Now I can move on. Now I can leave. I think that's a really nice way of putting it, a nice use of imagery there to really communicate that message that actually, yeah, it's there for a reason. It's not like you're a bad person because you're angry. It's that you need to make sense of where the anger's coming from and what needs to be addressed and what needs to be advocated for, or sometimes against if you're dealing with something like racism. So there's a lot there with that alone, Curtis. What else would you draw our attention to in terms of these counterfeits, in terms of things that can come up that may even seem quite pernicious, but actually they're giving us an important message that we need to integrate into ourselves and validate and then take action on appropriately, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. There's so many dyads we could dive into. One thing that I'd love to point out is that every dyad actually is part of a pendulum. So if we go to let's take kind versus nice, right? Let's take kind versus nice. Oftentimes we're taught to be nice. We're taught that at home, in school, even in church, we're taught to be nice. By the way, fascinating fact. Guess how many instances of the word nice is in any book of scripture?
I already know the answer to this, but yeah, let's say I can't. Okay, I'll put it like this. I can't think of any use of the word nice whatsoever, but I can think of kind. I
There's
can think of
zero.
loving kindness. So loving kindness is a phrase that's used throughout the scriptures, but I can't think of nice.
Yeah. There's zero instances of the word nice. Just in the New Testament alone, there's over 400 instances of the word kind. And yet we are living nice lives, right? We're living these, oh, I've got to be nice. I've got to do what they want. I've got to placate. I got to make sure that I'm not rocking the boat. And it turns out that nice is nothing more than a defense mechanism to avoid conflict. That I'm going to be nice to you so that you don't get mad back at me. I'm going to control your emotions by my niceness. When I put on this smile, I'm like, "Hey, I'm so happy. You need to be happy back to me." And nice is the whole point of being nice is to avoid conflict. And kind is magical. It truly is magical because it sees conflict and it casts a spell on conflict and turns conflict into connection. It says, because we're different, because you grew up in the UK and I grew up in America, there's things that we can learn from each other. There's ways we can see each other at a new level. Instead of saying, we don't have the phrase chalk and cheese in America, right? But you do. And so that's something that was like I could either argue with you about that, or I could say, wow, that's fascinating. Tell me more. Let me see you. Help me understand your soul. And it says, you know what? Conflict doesn't have to be conflict. It waves its magic wand and says, now conflict is connection, and I can see you on a deeper level because we're different, because we have different life experiences and we grew up different, and because you see things differently than I. That's not a reason for conflict. That's a reason for connection.
Yeah, I like that. There's another thing that strikes me as well about niceness. I think some people can use niceness as a ruse as well, a way of deceiving people.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
so that's another thing. There can be some, d- I suppose, scheming or malicious ways of using niceness as a cover for otherwise malevolent intentions. So how would you what would you say to somebody who might need to discern between niceness and kindness? How would somebody discern between niceness and kindness in another's behavior?
Yeah, this is one of the sneakiest of the counterfeits. Nice is so sneaky because it puts on a smile just like kindness does. It's polite just like kindness is. It has so many similarities. That's why it's one of the sneakiest, most dangerous emotions, and it damages relationships. It really does. It creates in marriage, it creates cycles of codependence. At work, it creates, well, last year they did a study on nice culture, And just in the US, they estimate that $694 billion was lost in corporate America because of nice culture. 694 billion. I mean, we're approaching $1 trillion of lost money because of nice culture. And so going to your question of how do you recognize that? This was actually the second dyad that I realized. The first one was pain versus misery. The second was nice versus kind. And and I wish that I could say that this was my personal revelation or whatever inspiration, but I had a really good friend. He called me up one day and I happened to be going through a divorce. And he said, "Hey Curtis, do people tell you you're a nice guy?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm a nice guy. Yeah. And, feeling all proud about how nice I am. I wore it as a badge of honor. I was like, he's going to heap on the laurels and the accolades, and he's going to tell me how great I am for being this nice guy. And he goes, Curtis, can I tell you something? I'm like, sure. He goes, the nice guy is the most despicable person on the planet. And I'm like, whoa,
Boom.
hold on. I just told you I'm nice. You so set me up for that. And and I'm like, what are you talking about? How is the nice guy despicable? He goes, he's not honest and he's manipulative. And I'm like, okay, for sure you're not talking about me. I'm the guy that, opens the door at church and walks the old lady across the street. As a kid, I literally looked for old ladies to walk across the street. And he goes, let's do a little experiment. He's like, what was the last nice thing you did? I'm like, well, wash the dishes. And he goes, okay, why did you do that? And I was like, to be nice, thinking that that would end the conversation. Well, I was doing it to be nice. He goes, dig deeper. Why did you do that? I was like, oh, I actually did it because I wanted to avoid conflict. I wanted to avoid a hard conversation. I wanted to be so nice that maybe that hard conversation could just go away. And and it was manipulative. And then I'm like, well, what about the honesty thing? He's like, have you ever kept your mouth shut when you knew there was a really important thing somebody needed to hear and you didn't say it? And I'm like, oh, yeah, all the time, all the time. Because nice leans out. It does it with a big smile on its face. It's like, hey, over there, you stay over there. I'm going to stay over here. And kind is willing to lean in and have the hard conversations, even if it means that it causes some discomfort for the other person. Even if it means that they might not like it, we do it. And if they feel pain with that conversation, we sit with them in the pain. It's not, I'm gonna just throw this out here and tell you you're a horrible person or things like that. It's I see a destructive cycle in your life that I'm gonna share with you because I love you. And if that hurts when I share that, I'm gonna sit with you in the hurt. I'm gonna sit with you. I'm gonna go through this with you. And as long as you want me, I'm here. And that's what kind does. Kind leans in. Kind says, I will have that important conversation. I'm not going to avoid it. I'm not going to do the dishes rather than having the hard conversation. I'm going to sit and I'm going to transform conflict into connection.
Hmm. I think something that's really, really crucial with that is about intention, isn't it? Because you can tell people the truth, so to speak, in quite a cruel way, and
Yeah.
almost
Yeah.
in a weaponize. You can like kind of weaponize people's weaknesses against them and say, well, you're like this or you're like that, whether it's labeling the bad behavior as you see it, or labeling the weakness, or the just labeling the person. And people can be quite cruel with that. And that there might be information in there that that person needs to hear in order to progress. But what you're talking about in terms of kindness is giving people the information that they need in order to increase their awareness of their areas of weakness and things that need to be worked on. But then you're saying, I'm here to help you with that as well, isn't it? So it's very different than just telling people the truth in a way that just dumps something on them that could be quite negative and walking away, or even much less than that, weaponizing it against them as an attack, isn't it? So kindness in that respect is there's quite a bit to that, isn't there? Versus just telling someone the truth about their weaknesses.
Yeah. And going back to the pendulum idea, like you hit on something that's so important, Tom, is that that we think, okay, I'm going to hold up this ball, this nice ball, and it's a heavy ball. It's this big, still heavy ball, and I'm going to hold it up and hold it up and hold it up until I can't hold up the fake smile any longer, and then I let it drop. And what happens? The ball swings to the other side and we go from nice to mean. And the opposite of uncentered is still uncentered. It's when we go from nice to mean, it's still uncentered. And we have this mean ball now that we're holding up, like I'm going to yell and I can't hold it anymore, so I'm just going to burst. And that's not kind. And it's so funny when I do this, the presentation on kind versus nice, especially like to singles groups and things like that. It's been uncanny. There's been at least one person stand up and be like, "Good, now I can tell off my ex." And I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. That's the other side of the pendulum." But when the mood swing stops, what we find right in the center is kindness. And on the one hand, you have suppression. You have this nice, I'm going to be nice. I'm not going to say anything, not going to rock the boat. Uh, Is that a phrase in the UK? Don't rock the boat. Or apple cart, don't
It is,
upset the
yeah,
apple.
yeah, both of them, yeah.
So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be nice and I'm going to suppress. So this is suppression. Over here, we have aggression. And both of these are dysregulated. Suppression and aggression both are dysregulated. In the middle, we have expression. So suppression, aggression, and expression. And when we do that, when we come at it in a way that shows true love for the other person, but starts with boundaries, starts with self, because you cannot be kinder to someone else than you are to yourself. It's not possible. You can be nicer to someone else. You can be like oozingly nice to someone and not be nice to yourself, but you can't be kinder to yourself than you are to someone else. And so
Mm.
kindness starts with self. Kindness starts with boundaries. Kindness starts with a healthy relationship with my soul. Then I can bring that to you and do the same thing.
Yeah, there are so many analogies that are brought to mind. Put your own mask on first. You can't draw from an empty well. Make sure your cup's filled up, all that sort of stuff. But one thing that really strikes me is this idea of thinking about the commandments, love thy neighbor. And a lot of people forget that, in terms of the great commandments, love thy neighbor as thyself. It chimes exactly with what you're saying. So it's not just like love everybody and just give of yourself and just destroy yourself because you just give, and you're draining yourself. It's love thy neighbor as thyself. So loving thy neighbor from a scriptural point of view presupposes that you are loving yourself and being kind to yourself, not being a narcissist, not being selfish, but
Yeah.
loving, being kind to yourself, being kind to others. So I absolutely love that connection that you've made there because I think it's right on in terms of the principles of the matter and actually getting things in order. Because I think when people try to draw from an empty well, so to speak, or they don't put on their proverbial oxygen mask first, whichever analogy you want to use, they can easily become resentful, as you say.
Yeah. And I love how you brought those analogies in because kindness does start here. And I think that scripture is one of the least understood scriptures in all of scripture. Because I don't think there's two great commandments. I think there's three great commandments. Love God, love yourself and then love your neighbor as yourself. And like you said, it's not in a narcissistic way. It's understanding your divine worth. It's understanding that you are a child of a divine being, the greatest being in the existence of the universe. You are a direct descendant of that, knowing that you have that goodness inside of you. You have that worth, that you are someone that can share that light with others, starting there, then letting that spread. I believe that's the second great commandment. The third is to love your neighbor as yourself. But first, start loving yourself. And that part people miss all the time is I actually need to love myself first. And then I can share that same light.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You can't, yeah, you just can't, you can't, like you say, you can't be kinder to other people than you are to yourself because you just don't have you don't have the resources, you don't have the capacity to do so. So yeah, really appreciate that. In terms of this work then, Curtis, what are some of the most surprising things that you found in the dyads besides what we've spoken about thus far? Is there anything, for example, that can't be counterfeited?
There is. I'm glad you brought us back to that. The as so like I said, the very first dyad I discovered was pain versus misery. And I realized that pain is inevitable. Pain has to happen. Pain is the most effective way to grow. And people don't like to hear that. They're like, wait a minute. You're saying I need pain? It is the most effective way to grow, to become more, to find your potential is through pain. Misery is its very insidious counterpart. And an understanding that pain is inevitable, misery is optional. Pain is what happens in life. Misery is what we add on top of pain to keep it stuck. So that was the very first one. The second one was kind versus nice. And as I was realizing this, I was like, wait, does every authentic emotion, does every single one have a counterfeit? And so I started doing focus groups and research, and I have literally thousands and thousands of post-it notes over here in my closet with emotions listed on them. And I keep all of my emotions on the shelf right over here. Um, I'm kidding. But I started doing all this research, and then I found one emotion called peace that was different from every other emotion. And I thought, wait a minute, is there a counterfeit for peace? And there isn't. There isn't a counterfeit for peace. And there's plenty of religious reasons why, there's plenty of logical reasons why. But one of the most fascinating is the neuroscience. The neuroscience of peace is fascinating. Peace is completely unique. Every other emotion has a sensory perception tied to it. You talk about anger, you've got cortisol, you've got adrenaline, you've got all these brain chemicals that are squirting when you feel this. You talk about connection, you've got oxytocin, you've got serotonin, you've got all these beautiful happy drugs that are squirting through your system. Peace is the only one without a sensory perception. It's amazing. It is such a unique emotion. And scientists don't even know why we feel peace. There's a couple theories around what that peace may be the what's left when everything else is gone. That is our base state. Culmination of acceptance of all emotion is the surrender and the acceptance of all emotion. And and without peace, we would have no guiding light. If peace could be counterfeited, we would have no compass to be able to say, this is where I need to go in my life.
That's a really interesting way of putting it that yeah, we need to have peace to have that inner compass. So how do we get peace then? If peace is a state that we need to be in to get guidance or to feel that like we can hear ourselves think, so to speak, or to get guidance, inspiration, whatever you want to call it, how do we get that peace then? How do we get to that state to kind of navigate through all of these other emotions and counterfeits? How do we get there?
Yeah. There's a couple ways to answer this. One is one that's dear to my heart, and you can see my statue up on my shelf. Um, I One of the reasons I believe counter or peace cannot be counterfeited is because it comes from the Prince of Peace, that it comes from Christ, and that when we tap into Christ, when we live as He lives, we find peace. Um, Going more scientific and looking at peace in another way is that when when we are in our most authentic state, and what I mean by that, I don't know if you've ever seen the emotional frequency scale by David Hawkins. Um, he
Yeah, yeah,
he has a scale of emotions, and at the very bottom is shame. Shame is the lowest frequency emotion we'll feel. And then apathy is right above that. Those are the last two emotions someone will feel before taking their life is apathy and shame, and that's at the very bottom. And then as you go up, you have love, you have joy, you have all these. But they did a fascinating experience or experiment because all of these emotions have a frequency. Our body literally, and this is not woo woo, science, or it's you can actually see the electromagnetic frequency that comes off your heart. I mean, that's what an EKG is, an ECG, right? It's measuring the electromagnetic frequency of your heart. And every emotion has a frequency. And David Hawkins, in his pyramid of emotional frequencies, he actually put he didn't put um, well, yeah, he put a bunch of emotions right at the top, but they did a new experiment with a Faraday cage, and the Faraday cage, for anybody that doesn't know, is a cage that prevents any electromagnetic frequencies in it. You cannot penetrate this with any other electricity, magnetism, nothing. So there's no frequencies inside the cage. They put people in there, and when they did this experiment, they found that the highest frequency was actually authenticity, that when you're being your authentic self, that's when you find peace. When you are being your true authentic self. And what I mean by that is not the body, not the titles, not the wins or losses, not the mask that I put on, the ego, none of that. What I mean is that diamond inside your soul that cannot be changed. When you are living in perfect alignment with that, that's when you find authenticity. That's when you find who you truly are. And that's the highest frequency emotion that you can feel. And I believe that that is one really important factor in finding peace is to find that divine person inside. Find the person with the amazing potential, the capacity to share light, the ability to change people's lives. That's inside. And when we tap into that, wow, wow, it's so powerful.
yeah. Because that's like you say, I like that analogy that you used of it being the diamond inside. It's entirely unique to us, isn't it? It's entirely idiosyncratic to each individual person because each of us is entirely unique. Each of us, each of our brains, for example, is entirely unique. Everything in that respect, in our essence, in our core, is unique. So it's as if we're designed or set up in such a way that we have, as individuals, got unique contributions to make because my authentic self is different to your authentic self, but we've all got different contributions to make in the process. And that's the beauty of it. This isn't about self-aggrandizement whatsoever. This isn't about puffing ourselves up or bullying ourselves up above another person. It's about stepping into our inherent intrinsic value and building upon that in contributing so that essentially our success is predicated upon our contributions, the quality of our contribution is often predicated upon that inner light, that inner diamond, as you say. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. You described it so well. And it's amazing because the the light that is inside of us, this is fascinating research that has just come out in the last 5 years, is that humans actually emit light, that our bodies emit light, and this electromagnetic frequency that we talk about from the heart, our hearts produce a field of frequency about 3 to 6 feet out on average. But they found as they measure this that some people can produce a field that's as big as 20 feet of this electromagnetic frequency. Literally, when you think about, oh, they've got such a magnetic personality. Yes, they literally do. They literally have this magnetism that draws them to you. And and when we think about the worth of a soul, when we think about the worth of who we really are, there's it's fascinating because everything in the universe, everything in my office here, your office there, everything is in a state of entropy, meaning that everything is in a state of decay. All of the rocks erode, all of the clothes break down, everything has a half-life except for the human soul. The human soul is the only thing not in a state of entropy, meaning that it's growing at the same time that everything around us is decaying and dying. The human soul continues to expand. It's the only thing that is not in a state of entropy. And how much value is in that? How much worth is in that? That it's a thing that is not, it's beyond this life. It's beyond what the mortal realm holds for us. That's amazing. That's incredible.
Yeah. You also just to shift gears a bit, Curtis, this is a really powerful conversation. You also work in relation to addiction recovery, don't you? And there's a counterfeit to recovery. Let's talk a little bit about that because I think that's a really powerful point to make.
Yeah, I would love to. You asked earlier what were some of the surprising ones. This was one of them, is that sobriety is the counterfeit of recovery. That sobriety actually creates a trap. And if you look at almost every program out there, they're completely focused on sobriety. They're completely focused on how long can you go. And I've got my stopwatch right here, right? So we've got this idea that I click the go button and this is the measurement of my worth. That however long I can go, and it's like holding your breath. You know, most people can't hold their breath even 30 seconds, let alone a minute. That's the feeling of sobriety. Sobriety uses one metric, and that's how long. And we're holding our breath. We're like, and holding our breath and trying, and our faces are going red and then purple. And then all of a sudden we go, I have to breathe. And the clock stops. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it gets reset back to zero. And what we had as this 1 month coin or this 3 year coin or whatever the coin, all of a sudden now it's worthless. And that's the wrong metric. That's the wrong metric because there's zero correlation with how long someone is sober and how deeply they've recovered, how much work they've done in their soul. There's zero correlation. People can be really good at sobriety, really good. They can hold on for a year or 2 years, but that's all it is holding on. It's not recovery. And it cracks me up looking at the etymology of the word sober. It actually comes from an Old English word called sobrius. Um, and sobrius means not drunk, dot, 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 at the moment. It includes the phrase at the moment. Sobriety is bookended by relapse. A relapse here and a relapse here, and the time in between, that's sober. Recovery is a completely different mindset. Recovery doesn't look at the clock or the calendar. It looks at how many of the triggers in my soul have I been willing to dig out? How many of those things have I been willing to dig out? And in most programs, here's my little demon. Most programs, they say, okay, you've got these emotional triggers that are screaming in your soul at you, and we're going to teach you how to push them down. So we're going to push these triggers down and we're going to hide them and pretend like they're not there. And kind of going back to our Jungian conversation earlier, is that the trouble with pushing down all of these emotional demons in our soul is that we have to carry them. If we're going to push them down, that means they're inside of us still screaming. And that's sobriety. And what we do is we pull our demons out and we take them to lunch. We take our demons to lunch and we sit across the table and we say, please help me understand, what message are you trying to share with me? What are you trying to tell me that's going to help me to grow that I haven't been addressing, that I haven't dealt with, that there's some trauma inside of me that's saying, hey, Curtis, you need this behavior over here. And the problem isn't the behavior. The problem is the need for the behavior.
Yeah. It's like anger, isn't it? It's like the demon, as you call it, needs to be validated. It needs to be recognized. It needs to be assured that action is being taken in order for it to then move on. Like anger. Is that a fair comparison?
It's so beautiful how you said that. Yes, that's exactly it. Is that we have these experiences that bury these skeletons in our soul, these demons in our soul, and and then we leave them there. And it's like if you got a sliver in your arm, right? The smart thing to do would be grab the tweezers and get it out. But oftentimes we get a sliver in our arm and we're like, oh, well, as long as nobody touches that, then it's not going to hurt. And so we put a cup on it and we wrap it up and we keep it so nobody can touch it. We bury it really deep down in our soul. And we're like, okay, this is going to work. But then we're like, oh, wait, what if I go outside? I guess I can't do sports anymore because that might hurt this sliver. And all of a sudden now the sliver's festering in our skin and it's getting worse. And we build an even bigger contraption. We 3D print this protective case where all we had to do in the first place was just pull out the sliver. We didn't have to try to prevent anybody from touching it if it's not there. And that's what taking our demons to lunch means
Yeah.
is I'm going to sit across the table. I'm going to say, what trauma, why were you buried in my soul in the first place?
Yeah.
And then rewrite the meaning of that trauma, rewrite that experience so that I can look at it in a completely different way. And my favorite definition of trauma is very simple. It's such a simple definition that trauma is simply an experience my brain couldn't comprehend at the time. And that's really important at the time. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That's the complete definition of trauma is I just couldn't comprehend what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. It's very empowering in terms of us understanding how we can basically ascribe meaning to anything. And that, for me, says that we are autonomous. We are free to choose because we can ascribe meaning to pretty much anything that we experience in life. And it can be that the thing that brings us great pain can be the catalyst, the catalyst. In some cases, it can be the thing, the moment that is the catalyst for so much growth, so much progression, which then brings so much success and so much joy. And that's what I think is really empowering is knowing that in being that, there's a lot of talk about, yeah, I'm the master of my destiny. And I don't think people always know what that means, but a lot of that is about knowing that you are free. You are sovereign over your life and able, capable of ascribing the meaning to this particular thing without anybody else telling you how bad it was or how it should never have happened or anything else. You can look at it and say, well, was it all bad? What came from that? What opportunities did it bring with it besides the challenges? Because the challenges and the heartaches and everything else are there. There's no denying that. What opportunities do I have now in this new context? And that's a tough road to take, and it takes real strength of character, especially the harder the heartache, the more so. But that is the way forward. That is the way to overcome resentment and to really find purpose and really find more about who you are, because that ascribing of meaning, I think personally that it reveals more about who you are by the way in which you ascribe meaning to certain things that happen in your life. Nobody else is going to see it the same way as you are because you're unique, and nobody else knows or is going to be given the guidance that you are going to be given, whatever form that takes, on the path that is yours to take. So, yeah, I think that's so empowering, and there are a lot of people that would rail against that and would be very angry at that outlook on things. I've known people get very angry in those sort of conversations because they feel as though they can't do that, or it's like they don't want to hear that side of things. They just want to sit in. It's like you say about the slither of glass that's in the arm. It's like they want to leave that there, leave that alone. It's too painful. But the sooner you get to it, the less painful it is. And that's the paradox, isn't it? It's that, yes, this is going to feel painful in terms of taking it out. The sooner you do it, however, the less painful it is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. Is people think, oh, it's going to be so painful to pull this out. It will be some pain. Yes. Just be ready for that. But then it won't fester and get pussy and it won't continue to hurt. It will heal and then you're done. And I love how you said, talking about the sovereignty, is that there's a fascinating study by Dr. Paul T.P. Wong out of Canada, and he's the father of positive psychology 2.0. So it's like the second version of positive psychology, and he created what's called the existential gratitude scale. And he first had people take a test on the well-being scale. So there's a psychological test called the well-being scale, and he marked everybody according to their scores. But then he had them take another test called the existential gratitude scale, and he asked people what they were grateful for. And this was fascinating. What he found was the people that express gratitude for their pain, for the hurt they've experienced in life, they, on the wellness scale, were in a completely different stratosphere of everyone else. They were in a completely different place. When we can get to the point where we say, I'm grateful for the pain, it changes. It changes our entire life. It's almost as if we were living in black and white, and all of a sudden the world becomes color. And it is a completely transcendent idea of saying thank you for the pain, of getting on our knees and thanking God for the pain. That is a place where we tap into the true nature of life. We tap into the true nature of God and our existence here. That's a transcendent place where if we can get on our knees and say, thank you, God, for the pain today. I know it helped me in these ways. I know I grew in these ways. I know it connected me with these people. When we can do that, we live a different life. We're not even playing the same game anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so powerful, and it's such an indication of sovereignty when you are able to do that. The thing is that you said about trauma strikes me in this as well, in the sense that there are times when people aren't ready to do that as well. There are times when, especially when they're in the immediate aftermath of something that could be terrible. They could have lost a spouse, they could have lost a loved one in a tragic accident, and they're just not there at that particular time. They can't do it at that moment. What's your message to those people in terms of finding that meaning in a more holistic way? Because not everybody's going to be able to do this right away, and rightly so, because again, they're going to be feeling emotions that are going to be signaling things to them that are absolutely valid, that are absolutely as you would expect them to feel as a human being, but they can't get to that point where they can, get on their knees or thank God, whatever, if they are believers. So what can they do? What should they do in the meantime, would you say, in order to honor the pain and the hurt that they're experiencing, but also not to withdraw themselves from the opportunity to benefit from the growth associated with the pain?
Yeah. The first thing I just do is have them read Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. It's such a powerful memoir of his time in Auschwitz concentration camp. It's beautiful and horrifying all at the same time, and just it really brings this point to the surface. In it, he says this is the last great human freedom is the ability to choose our actions and attitudes in any given set of circumstances. And keep in mind, he was in Auschwitz. He was a Jew in Auschwitz. And he said, we can choose our attitude in any given set of circumstances. And I, as I was going through my divorce, um, I I went to lunch with a friend named Jesse, and Jesse Citrid, and he's an man. And I was in that place that you're describing right now. I was in the place of I am so not ready to look at life in the way that is in truth. And I started going through my litany of offenses that were happening in my life. And I'm like, and this happened to me, and this happened to me, and this happened to me. And he goes, Curtis, stop, time out. He said, life doesn't happen to you, life happens for you. And I'm like, he must not have heard. Let me go through the list again. And I just started going back over the list. And I'm like, and this and this and this happened to me. And he goes, Curtis, stop. Stop. Life doesn't happen to you. It happens for you. All of these things are for your good. All of them. Not the birthday cakes and butterflies. All of them, including the pain, is for your good. And it hit me like a brick wall. I was like, holy cow, is that even possible? That all of the pain that I'm experiencing right now, all of this trauma that I'm going through, is it even possible that it's for my good? And that question haunted me. I was like, oh, I don't want it to be. I want to play the victim right now. I want to be in that place of despair and misery. And it kept ringing in my skull like, could it actually be for my good? And what I found was that, yes, everything, including the pain, was for my good, that pain and joy can exist together. It's not pain and then joy afterwards. You can actually feel both of those emotions at the exact same time. And if I hadn't gone through the pain of the last 8 years, 8+ years, I wouldn't be writing a book on counterfeit emotions. I wouldn't be having recovery programs where men go from hopeless to confident, strong, feeling like they're part of an eternal family. Like I wouldn't be doing those things. I would still be an entrepreneur in the tech world, doing what I had been doing most of my career. But because of the pain, that's where I was given the opportunity to shift. And pain is God's chisel that He scrapes out the old wood in our soul so that he can fill it with joy and love. And it hurts. Oh, Tom, it hurts. I've never experienced pain at that level of when I went through those trials. It hurt so bad as God was in there with his chisel just carving away at my soul. And I'm like, oh, God, please, please, it hurts so bad. But then he started to pour the joy in. He started to pour the joy into that empty space that used to be that dead wood. And I felt the joy and the pain simultaneously. And that's why that was the very first dyad that I came across. That I came across because I felt joy with pain. And and now this is my Patty. This is the love of my life. Um and there's like I've found a true celestial marriage. I found that joy can be an everyday experience, and I never would have known that if I hadn't gone through the pain. And so I stopped asking the question, why is life happening to me? And I started asking the question of, how is life happening for me? And then I even took it one step beyond. I went from victim of how is this happening to me to victor, how is this happening for me? And finally, ask the question, how can this happen through me? How can my experience, my pain be for the good of others? And went from victor to now vessel.
Yeah, that's really powerful. It's all the more power. These conversations are all the more powerful when we talk about personal experiences like you've had, because then it's real. It's not just, it's not a theory. It's not even science, so to speak. It's real life and it's lived experience. It's happened and it's been overcome. So you've gone through that process. You've gone through, like you say, you've gone through the feeling the victim. And let's be honest, sometimes we do want to feel validated as the victim. Like you say, we've all felt like that at different times, where we want someone just to say, yeah, it's so hard for you. It's such a raw deal, such a bad deal for you. But you get stuck there. The price you pay for that is stagnation
Yeah.
and damnation. You're stuck, you're trapped,
Yeah.
as in, like a dam that is blocking your progress. And that's the price you pay for that. But to then overcome it is the victory. And like that, I love that flipping the question instead of why is this happening to me? It's how is this happening for me? And that's the question. It presupposes that there's a greater purpose at play, that there's a higher authority to whom you can ask that question and receive an answer and receive guidance. So it's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly empowering. And whatever people's beliefs or none are who are listening to this podcast, I think that's something for everybody to reflect on is how how can we make sense of our lives, not in spite of the pain and the trials and the challenges, but because of the things that have happened externally coming into our world and the choices that we've made thus far. How can we learn from those things? How can we improve our self-awareness as well to learn how we can be better, how we can make the choices that are always ours to make, as Viktor Frankl points out in Man's Search for Meaning, never relinquishing the God-given inherent autonomy that we have, that freedom to choose. Curtis, as we draw this to a close, there's one thing before we wrap this up, there's one thing else I've got to mention from a previous conversation that we had, and that's the number one predictor of success. What is that, and how can we benefit from it?
Yeah. The number one predictor of success, based on a study done by the Center for Creative Leadership. They looked at all factors. They were actually looking originally for the number one success in business, but then through their research, they found that it wasn't just business. It was in all aspects of life. But the thing that will predict future success more than anything else is emotional intelligence. More than going to Harvard or Columbia or Oxford or anywhere. It doesn't matter what the degree is, it doesn't matter previous experience. The number one predictor for success is emotional intelligence, is being able to understand what's happening inside, to be able to take those and put them in a healthy way, receive the message, turn it to the authentic, that that is by far the number one indicator of success.
Yeah. So when you say emotional intelligence, let's just be super clear on this. Is this the full range of emotional intelligence? So what is it? Self-awareness, empathy, social awareness, all that sort of stuff, or is it just simply just knowing what emotions you're feeling at a given moment in time and acting appropriately? What do we mean by emotional intelligence here?
Yeah, yeah, it is more of the full spectrum. It starts with self. No, do I understand my emotions? And when we can understand our emotions at a deep level, then we can start to understand other people's emotions. We become incredibly naturally empathetic because we see them in what they're feeling, because we know it ourselves. We've been able to identify it and give it a name. We've been able to say, oh, this emotion I'm feeling right now is anxiousness, or this emotion is fear, or this is joy, or this is giddiness, or whatever the emotion is. We know what it's called. We know its name, and be able to know that for ourselves gives us the ability to know it in others, so we can start to see the social emotions that are happening around us, and we can start connecting. I truly believe that one of the necessities of life, you've got food, you've got water, you've got shelter, you've got clothing. I believe the fifth is connection, that one of the absolute necessities in life is connection. And when we can connect to ourselves first, then connect to others, that creates this rich, beautiful experience that we call life.
Yeah, and it comes right back to love thyself.
Yeah.
What a great place to end things on, Curtis. Curtis, thanks so much for your time. I've got to ask just finally before you go, you've got a book coming out on all of this. Have we got a title yet? Have we got a release date?
The title is Counterfeit Emotions. We're cross our fingers. We're putting in the book proposal this week. So knock on wood that we get a great publisher to pick it up. And so yeah, that'll determine the publication date, but we're looking early 2026. So probably May timeframe, maybe a little later. We'll see where it's at, but the book proposal goes out this week. So
Fantastic. Well, all the very best of luck with that, Curtis. We wish you well, and thank you so much for your time on the Real Clear Values podcast.
thanks so much.